Reminiscence is a 2021 film starring Hugh Jackman, Rebecca Ferguson, and Thandie Newton, and was written and directed by Lisa Joy. It tells the story of Nick Bannister, a private investigator of the mind, who runs a business along with his friend Watts, where customers are able to relive their past memories. When a new client named May walks in one day, Nick falls for her almost instantly. But when she goes missing, he sets out to solve her mysterious past, hoping it will lead him to her. Reminiscence is a futuristic film noir, and therein lies the reason why I was interested to see this movie ever since I first heard of it. I was intrigued, wondering what an obviously science fiction-y plot would be like when filtered through the lens of one of my favorite genres. And this movie really did not disappoint. It has all the stereotypical elements of film noir. The movie starts with narration from our main character, and this continues on throughout the film. Much of it is set at night, which is necessary due to the world that this movie is set in, which I'll explain more a bit later. Our hero is a private eye of sorts, and he has a somewhat tenuous relationship with the police, although they do use his services from time to time. For some visual cues, he's often seen wearing a trench coat, and while he may not normally wear a fedora, he does end up in one for one brief scene. At one point, when he pulls out his weapon of choice, it's a snub-nosed revolver, the go-to gun for many hard-boiled heroes and villains over the years. And then there are the archetypal characters. Rebecca Ferguson as May is definitely a femme fatale. Or is she? I'm going to try and avoid spoilers in this review, but that uncertainty of not knowing whether or not you should trust the leading lady is also a hallmark of the genre. Every private eye, it seems, needs a secretary, and Watts, played by Thandie Newton, would loosely fall into that category. Her character is a modern-day take on that role, so much so that she isn't really a secretary at all, but more a partner in the business. She's Nick's confidant, his oldest and closest friend, and tries to keep him in check. There's also a rich man and his family involved in the mystery, a corrupt cop, drug dealers and gangsters and thugs and henchmen. I realize that's getting redundant, but all of these are really fun for a noir fan to pick out and slot into those familiar roles. But like I said, it's also a futuristic film. I guess it would qualify as science fiction, but the main element that would categorize this movie as that would be the machine that is used for someone to access their memories. While the device a person gets into is mostly just a tank of water, I thought the look of the projection area where the memory can be viewed by Nick and Watts was quite interesting, with strands of some kind hanging down and the memory being visualized by them, giving them a shimmery, gauzy look, making everything appear more nostalgic as a result. As I mentioned, Nick is hired by the police for interrogations using memory devices like this. And one idea that I thought was really interesting was getting a warrant, but instead of for a location that can be searched, it's for a set length of time. So the prosecution is allowed to probe a suspect's memories, but only for the last 10 years, for example. That and other little touches were nice, subtle clues to how this world works and what has changed by the advent of this technology, which at the time of the movie has been around for a while and has been advancing. The world it's set in is obviously supposed to be one that has been drastically affected by climate change, with the result being cities having been overrun by water, and the daytime temperatures rising to such an extent that most people sleep during the day and work and live at night. There are also quite a few references to a war that took place at the border and continuing conflicts surrounding it. All of that is supposed to evoke the topical issues that are talked about now. What I appreciated is that it's not what the movie is about, and it doesn't hit you over the head with warnings about those issues. It's mainly just a backdrop for this mystery to play out in front of. And it also lends itself to some really interesting visuals. Right outside Nick's business, the center of the street is perpetually underwater. So when he closes up shop and heads home, he's walking through water immediately. He and other characters wear boots all the time for that reason as well. People travel around in small boats to get places. When Nick hails a cab, at one point a little boat with a yellow taxi sign pulls up to the dock. There are also elevated trains that travel above the water's surface and seem to have replaced highways and bridges between cities. Visually and cinematography-wise, I thought this movie was excellent. With so many landscapes dominated by water, this movie obviously has a great deal of CGI, but I think it's pretty well used. The lighting too was really great in certain scenes. One scene with Nick and May staying together in a tower on a balcony overlooking again more water was quite breathtaking. There have been several films in the last couple of years that I thought had a bit of a similar look. I'm thinking of something like Tenet, or those beautiful establishing shots from No Time to Die, which I've talked about before. I really like that getting back to grand, wide shots of real locations. And like I said, this movie wasn't all on real locations, but there were scenes that I would be hard-pressed to tell the difference. And if they fooled me and the whole thing was shot in a soundstage, then kudos to them. Obviously, the best use of special effects is when they're seamless. I really like the look of the interior of Nick's business as well. To me, it looked like it was supposed to have maybe been an old bank or something like that, but that vintage Art Deco look and the woodwork in there was really impressive and was another nice nod to bridging the noir story with this future world. Okay, now on to the performances. And I thought the main trio in this movie were each very good. Hugh Jackman was great. I thought he had a good look as a somewhat grizzled character. He's also got a good voice for this type of part, really leaning into a bit of a growling, whispered tone at times. It's maybe not a standout performance when I think about it, but he's extremely believable. And he does a good job when the script turns him into another familiar character for a noir, a bit of a patsy. Something you might not always think of when you think of those tough, hard-nosed PIs of the past is how often they got roughed up and weren't always all that adept at getting out of the sticky situations that they ended up in. And that was something I really appreciated when it happened here too. I think we're all really used to seeing an action hero punch and shoot his way out of any situation. So when Hugh Jackman is all of a sudden getting kicked around and beaten up by a couple short, stocky, tough guys and not being able to fight them off, it's a bit of a surprise. But I like that. He's not a superhero. But it's not just in the action scenes. He gets duped. He gets tricked. And he's left pretty shaken up and vulnerable by it. So I think he was a really well-written character. And with a name like Nick Bannister, I mean, come on, that's a pretty great detective name. Rebecca Ferguson, as I mentioned, plays May, the lounge singer with a past that Nick falls for. I really like Rebecca Ferguson. Ever since Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, which is I guess where most people discovered her, I've just been so impressed with her. I've heard her compared, looks-wise at least, to Ingrid Bergman. And I think that old school, timeless look to her is really well used in this type of movie. She's great at playing characters where there's more going on inside the character that she might not want others to see, and acting that while still showing there is something there without completely burying it is all really skillfully done. Now that I think of it, that's a similarity between this character and her character of Ilsa from the Mission Impossible movies. It's hard to get a read on her character, which is intentional, I'm sure. The mystery and the story depend on the fact that she's such a cipher. But she's great at that, and the story makes great use of us wanting to like and trust her, but not being sure if we should believe everything we're hearing and seeing. Her and Nick's relationship is not explored terribly deeply. It's mostly in brief flashbacks. That's another thing to note, is that this movie has a lot of flashbacks. The memory device at its core is a good excuse to include lots of them. Content-wise, I can't vouch for everything in this movie. I much prefer the classic movie style of a couple of kisses is all we need to see, so I can't recommend a couple of brief scenes. But again, about their relationship, it's mostly left to Nick's determination to find her that we get a sense of how much he really does care for her. Thandie Newton as Watts was really good. She has a nicely drawn character, and her past of serving in the army with Nick is brought out just enough to get a sense of their loyalty to each other. They're able to try and keep each other accountable, and I thought their friendship was a real highlight of the movie. She's not involved in the investigation into May's disappearance very much, which I'm not sure whether that was a good thing, but otherwise she was pretty well used. I think she does a great job of showing her care for Nick, but also balancing that with being quite emotionally closed off herself. I think as a whole the movie is quite well written. A tendency in mysteries like this can be to go very convoluted, and I think this story largely avoided that. There are a lot of characters with varying motivations, but not to the point where it's confusing, which is why it was a little odd in a couple of scenes where there was very obvious dialogue to further clarify what we've just been watching. Maybe if you're not paying attention, you might have missed what was happening, but I think the film did just fine showing some of those things visually. I don't know if those were just notes from the studio by people who did find it confusing, but I think the movie could have dropped some of that more redundant dialogue. As far as action scenes go, there were a couple that I quite enjoyed. The first being a pretty chaotic gunfight that breaks out while Nick is on the hunt for more clues to May's whereabouts. I think it all looked pretty good and was nice and messy, not too balletic or anything like that. Of course, almost the whole thing happens while Hugh Jackman's face is submerged in water, so that looked a little goofy in a couple shots. But the best action scene was a fistfight that was so well staged. Plenty of wide shots showing both characters and actors going at it, and the fight ends up involving a claw hammer and a knife. It was really tense and also a lot of fun. A few more things I liked. The movie did a good job of showing how the city, the movie is set in Miami, has changed into the different areas since the city flooded. The wealthier residents live in dryland areas while the poor people live in more seedy areas, such as the Sunken Coast, one of them is called, amongst old recycling plants. All of those areas had really interesting and unique looks. There's also a shot at an abandoned amusement park, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but the establishing shot was so reminiscent of a similar shot in The Third Man, with the Holly Martin's character standing with the Ferris wheel behind him. Also, that fight scene I talked about ends up on a rooftop at one point, and a fight happening right in front of a neon sign reminded me so much of Cary Grant's fight with George Kennedy in Charade. Again, I don't know if they meant that. This scene is in broad daylight, the scene in Charade is at night, but I like the connection. Charade is another movie which, while it's not a noir, also has a main character trying to sort out a different character's identity at the heart of it. There's a scene that takes place at a mansion his investigation leads him to. And inside we keep seeing men walking by, all wearing identical gray suits and white fedoras. It all gets explained in the movie, but that image is so... creepy is not the right word, but surreal. And I liked it. I also want to talk about one thing that if I talk about it will definitely be a spoiler, so if you're ready, you're going on a journey. Okay, as I mentioned, the movie has lots of flashbacks, or memories, more accurately. And as we're watching, we realize that the only times we've seen May are in Nick's mind, in his memories of her. And by the end of the movie, we realize that the whole time that Nick has been searching, she's been dead. Or she died while he was searching. I'm not 100% clear on that. But the point is that we never see Nick and May together in the present. So their whole relationship feels kind of unsatisfying, which is likely on purpose. We, the audience, end up with a similar feeling that the main character does. I don't mind that, but it makes the story element of their relationship feel a bit hollow, since we never really learned that much about her, other than her troubled past and that she does do a good thing in the end and get redeemed. But the fact he and we never really get closure is kind of disappointing. And while we're on that note, I'll quickly talk about the ending. In the final scene, we flash forward, and it seems Nick now spends his days almost constantly in the tank, with the electrodes strapped to his head and reliving the brief time he had with May. And I don't know, I wasn't crazy about the ending. In a way, it somewhat reminded me of the ending to Somewhere in Time. There, from what I remember, Christopher Reeve has fallen in love with Jane Seymour, a woman from the past, and when he is forced to return to his time, he ends up becoming depressed and lonely until I believe he ends up dying. So obviously, this movie has no time travel element, but that idea of someone fixating on someone who has died or is no longer around, and it ends up consuming them, I don't really like. Again, this is a noir, and I don't expect noirs to have happy endings. But the movie almost treats it as if it is a happy ending in a way, which I guess maybe I just don't get it. Maybe it's a comment on the grieving process or something like that. I'm not sure. I understand the idea of holding on to the good memories you have of a loved one, but as an ending to this story, seeing an aged Hugh Jackman living kind of a fantasy is not that satisfying, I don't think. I'll have to watch it again to see if the ending grows on me. The spoiler journey is ending. So I just have to say I did enjoy this movie. I will say though that it is almost 2 hours long, And in the second half, maybe just in the last third, I could start to feel its length. That may be just due to the number of flashbacks and not always knowing when you're in the midst of one. I wouldn't say it ever got boring, but I just think it could have been better paced. The investigation is interesting. Maybe a few of those scenes could have been tightened up a bit. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure if I get the message of it though. From the very start, Nick Bannister is telling us in his narration that memories are like a drug. People want to use a happier past to escape the life they're in now. And you see him following that path as well. But the ending seems to negate some of those intoned warnings he gives us. I assume the director and writer had some deeper meaning to all of that. And maybe it's up to the audience to decide how they want to take it. And that's probably the best way to do it anyway. So if you're a fan of film noir, there is plenty to enjoy in this movie. I believe it did not do very well at all when it came out. So if you get the chance to check it out, I would say it's an interesting watch, and definitely didn't deserve the disinterest it received last year. Thanks for checking out this review. If you enjoyed it, please check out my channel, Hildebrand Productions, for more reviews like this. Thanks for watching. Adios for now.